Good evening, comrades and friends. So I'm here today to talk briefly about the situation in Tijuana and San Diego with the Migrant Caravan. As many of you know, thousands of people from Central America are currently gathering on the border in Tijuana to demand entry into the U.S. They are fleeing the violence wrought by U.S. imperialism, and they are pursuing the wealth the U.S. imperialism has stolen from their homelands for centuries. I'm sure everyone here has seen the horrible videos of the gas attacks against asylum seekers, and the repression against them continues. Fortunately, as always, where there's repression, there's resistance. And this past Sunday saw a National Day of Actions with actions all across the country. The call came from the San Diego Migrant and Refugee Solidarity Coalition, of which the party is a member. Other members described in the front page article on the paper include Unión del Barrio, which is really leading it up, Colectivo Zapatista, the Border Angels, the American Indian Movement, PSL, Committee Against Police Brutality San Diego, the Palestinian Youth Movement, and many other groups. In addition to actions around the country, there was a march of over 500 people in San Diego to the border and a simultaneous action of over 1,000 asylum seekers and supporters in Tijuana. The demands of the coalition and the caravan are a respect for the right to asylum, that the asylum claims be processed as soon as possible, to acknowledge the U.S. role in the exodus of people from Central America, namely that U.S. imperialism is responsible for the conditions that are forcing people to leave their homelands, an increase in international solidarity, including from the UN and the Red Cross, that migrants held in detention centers be released, and that anyone responsible for human rights violations against asylum seekers be prosecuted. On that note, I'd like to mention that Roxana Hernandez, a trans woman who died in ICE custody from AIDS, received a lot of attention a few months ago, but new information has come about her death, that she was brutally beaten while in custody shortly before her death. So this shows the kind of conditions that the migrants are struggling against and why they need our solidarity. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the history of Honduras in the past few decades, many, if not most of the migrants are coming from Honduras, and it's important for us to be able to tell other members of our class here in the United States what the context is that's causing people to come to the U.S. And so Manuel Zelaya was elected president of Honduras in 2005 as a member of the Liberal Party, which is a centrist bourgeois party. He comes from a wealthy logging family, very much a candidate of the bourgeoisie. However, after he came to power, he began to move to the left, and there were some moderate social reforms, new schools, minimum wage increases, investments in public transportation, and crucially, he brought Honduras into ALBA, the Bolivarian Alliance of Peoples of Our America, which was founded by Venezuela and Cuba in 2004. Honduras is no longer a member, but at this point there are 10 Caribbean and Latin American nations that are part of that political and economic organization for cooperation. And I think it's important to note that even these small reforms were too much for U.S. imperialism and the Honduran bourgeoisie. So in 2009, led by General Romeo Vasquez Velasquez, who had studied at the School of Americas, that's a thread always going through every one of these coups in South America, is the presence of the School of the Americas. For those who don't know, that's a school here in the United States where the U.S. trains people to be members of militaries in countries in Central and South America and around the world. But its primary role is to inoculate those militaries with support for U.S. imperialism for times like this. And so there was a coup in 2009 that received almost universal international condemnation, except notably from the U.S., then led by President Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who called for new elections instead of the reinstatement of Zelaya. They said, well, let's just move on. And I think it's important to note that, again, Zelaya was by no means a revolutionary or radical leader. In fact, his father had been convicted of a massacre in 1975 of when he was president of a logging company, of killing 15 campesinos and religious leaders who were advocating for agrarian reform. And that's in fact how Manuel Zelaya came to be the head of his family's logging company. And so even these most moderate, minor movement to the left was considered unacceptable to U.S. imperialism. After the coup, there was, of course, very little support for the new government, which led to massive state repression and very quickly the highest murder rate in the world, which is an infamous distinction Honduras has held for quite some time until it was recently surpassed by El Salvador. Thousands upon thousands of workers, peasants, activists, judges, and journalists in Honduras have been killed. Many know the name of Berta Cáceres, an indigenous activist who was fighting to preserve her tribe's land from the development of a dam. But we should always remember that when we think of her, she is a representative of thousands whose names we will never know. Fast forward to 2017, Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez was running for re-election. And it's important to note that he was running for re-election. Part of the justification for Zelaya's removal in 2009 was that he was supporting a non-binding referendum to have a constituent assembly to revise the Constitution. And people accused him of this being a process to amend the Constitution to allow him to run for a second term. And this was used as the justification for the military removing him. Fast forward 8 years later to 2017, U.S.-backed candidate Juan Orlando Hernandez runs for re-election. It's totally fine. No problem. So anytime if the people raise the various legalistic justifications for the coup, this shows right here that that's all just, that's all cover. It was ultimately about making, suppressing even a mildly progressive force in Honduras and suppressing the people's resistance. So that election was stolen. When the results first came out, it was quite clear that he was going to lose. Suddenly, the cameramen, the media people, a few minutes later are changing their tune, and suddenly the numbers are different and he's winning. And again, there was massive uprisings among the Honduran people against this stolen election, which were repressed by U.S.-trained military and police forces. And so this is the situation in Honduras today, the really untenable humanitarian crisis there, for which U.S. imperialism is responsible, and these are the conditions that are causing people to come to the border. Fight for Immigrants and Refugees Everywhere is working to organize a contingent to go to the border in about a week or so to express solidarity, and there should be a fundraising appeal to support that coming out quite soon.